Hi, welcome to Yamaha Guitars, My Guitar Breakthrough. I'm Scott Marceau, Artist Relations Manager, and today we are joined by an artist that really created a blueprint that all of us guitarists are still following to some degree or another, created their own genre. Mr. Lee Ranaldo. How's it going, Lee?
It's going very well. Nice to see you, Scott.
Nice to see you. It's awesome. Where are you joining us from?
I'm in my home in Lower Manhattan, New York City.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
For anyone watching, I'm up here in Calabasas. This is the Yamaha Guitar Group headquarters. It's kind of our showroom, and hopefully when you're out here, Lee will take you up here. And
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it.
To get started, so what's your connection with Yamaha? I know we talked about the acoustics, so I guess tell us what you know about Yamaha acoustics in your world, or Yamaha, how it is part of your musical life.
I've known about the acoustics for a long time. I think that even at one point in Sonic Youth's sort of middle period, maybe late 90s, I had a Yamaha electric for a little while, passed through our ranks. I don't remember what the model was, and I've got a beautiful Yamaha U1 piano. And I knew about the acoustic guitars for a long time. And I knew that some friends of mine, in particular, Elliott Smith, was playing a lot of Yamaha acoustic guitars. And I had a couple guitar playing friends of mine talk to me forever about the Red Label guitars from the 70s, the ones made in Japan in the 70s, how great they were and how inexpensive they were. And finally, early in the pandemic, I found my way to one of those. And it kind of was a transformative moment for me because it was not an expensive guitar, made in Japan, Red Label, Nippon Gaki as they're called. And I just fell in love with this guitar. It really became my main guitar for pretty much the entirety of the pandemic. The more I played it, the more I felt it revealed to me a lot of stuff in terms of like songs that were inside it and a beautiful tonal quality. And I just really loved the guitar. It was really easy to play. It was everything that it was built up to be for, by my friends who were talking about it forever. And then recently I found my way to one of your current Yamaha guitars built in that style. FSX3, I believe it's called.
Yeah.
And the two of them, I've just kind of been bouncing back between the two of them and really enjoying the playing of them, basically, more than anything else.
That's great. And I'm going to get you, I should say we're going to get you a Japanese one too, the FSX5.
Yeah, I don't want to get all guitar nerdy early in this conversation, but I'm really looking forward to comparing that with the X3 and with my old FG 150 from 1971, I believe it is. I'm really curious about how they stack up next to each other.
Yeah, it's gonna be cool. I can't wait to hear what you think. And do you think there's a tonality? How would you describe? Because when everyone kind of gets hip to the Yamaha acoustics or the vintage ones, they play them and they're like, oh yeah. So do you think it's a tonality thing or is it a feel thing?
I think it's a little bit of each. The necks are really easy to play. I don't know if I would say, in a certain way, they feel as easy to play as an electric guitar neck. So maybe that means they're a little thinner than some acoustic guitars. But especially in terms of the old one, I think it's the tone that's coming out of that body. And I think the construction of those guitars was done really, really well. Japanese quality construction. They're super lightweight. They seem to be lightly braced. The top is really resonant. And there's just something about the tone that can match. I have a lot of very expensive guitars from a bunch of different brands. And my 1971 Nippon Gaki kind of stacks up against all of them and just sounds great. And, like I said, through the pandemic, I put most of those other ones, took a back seat to the Nippon Gaki guitar.
Wow, that's pretty amazing to hear. And before we talk breakthrough, I just wanted to, while we're talking about the music you've created acoustically, your latest release acoustically is, just so I'm looking so I get the title right, In Virus Times. I've been listening to it. It's really beautiful.
Thank you.
So did the genesis for that start during the pandemic, or how did that work?
Yeah, it sure did. I had my previous record, which is called Names of North End Women, came out 5 days before lockdown. And I made that record with a musical partner of mine named Raul Refri, who lives in Barcelona, and we worked for a year on this record. And then the minute it launched, everything shut down. So we didn't have an opportunity to go out and play the songs. We'd had a really ambitious touring plans and all this. And I took a bunch of months off, right? Starting in, early March 2020. I had just spent a year like slaving over this record. I mean, happily so, but I wasn't ready to start writing new songs immediately. And quite frankly, I pretty much stopped playing guitar for a few months, just tuning into the news, listening about the pandemic, all the political stuff that was going on in America with Trump and everything as well. And I found I immersed myself in a bunch of other things, some writing projects and some archival projects, and a lot of, I'm also a visual artist, so I was doing a lot of drawing and painting. And partly because we really didn't know what was going to happen, if we were going to be locked down for 3 weeks or 3 months or longer. And, I think we have held out hope that it would all kind of subside and we'd be able to resume our touring plans for the previous record. And by the late summer, when that hadn't happened, I started picking up a couple of guitars again, including the Nippon Gaki guitar. And just I felt like I was a beginner coming back to learning how to play guitar. I hadn't played for a bunch of months, and that record is kind of what was the genesis of that period, late summer, early fall of that year. Just sitting here in this room, I set up. Normally I record that kind of like sort of stuff like that on my iPhone, but in this case, I had just had a notion that maybe I was onto something. So I set up a couple really good mics and spent a few evenings kind of just playing the parts and the different themes that became that record, and then spent like a couple months on the computer editing and structuring the piece and figuring it out. But yeah, it really happened during the pandemic.
Yeah, it's a beautiful. Well, I mean, I'm glad you got to make it. It really is a great listen, and
Yeah. And for me,
so
it was something unique because for anyone who hasn't heard it or doesn't know about it, it's an instrumental record. I guess you might call it an EP. It's 24 minutes long, something like that, spread across 2 sides of a vinyl record. And the previous record was a highly composed studio creation with a lot of electronic elements and studio whiz and bang. And this record was just a pure acoustic instrumental record. There's a little bit of vocalizing, but there's no lyrics or singing. And for me, it was really interesting to make it,
yeah. So the show is My Guitar Breakthrough, where we talk to artists about breakthrough moments that really kind of got them to a next level. It can be personal or musical. So I wanted to ask you, Lee, what is your guitar breakthrough?
Well, I was thinking about this, and there can be a lot of different answers for this question, but I kept coming back to the breakthrough, if you will, that really sent me on my path as a guitarist, which was when I was first learning to play the guitar. And for a long time, I played nothing but acoustic guitar when I was learning to play guitar. It wasn't until I was sort of at the end of high school that I started playing electric guitar, and that became dominant. But I was learning how to play acoustic guitar, as everybody does. You're 12, 13, 14 years old. Found the chords. Friends showed me chords to sort of a couple Beatles songs and things like that. And I was learning my chords. And I had an older cousin who was a pretty good guitar player. And he showed me some ideas with open tunings. And I was a bit familiar with open tunings at the time because I was in love with Neil Young and Keith Richards and Joni Mitchell and David Crosby and a lot of different people, old blues players like Reverend Gary Davis, that were playing in open tunings. And he showed me a couple different open tunings. And, later I found out that Lou Reed and the Velvet Underground were working with specific open tunings. And when I moved to New York, I played for a number of years with this downtown art rock composer named Glenn Branca, and he was working with sort of orchestras of electric guitar players, all in specific open tunings. And it really opened a door that I almost never walked back through it. I mean, it just, once Sonic Youth started, it really solidified. We after the first record we made, we almost never played in standard tuning. We devised all these tunings of our own creation. Some of them necessitated really particular string gauges, so we were building our own sets of strings and things like that. But in the earliest days, the thing that struck me about it was when you're playing in an open tuning, you can sound a lot better than your skill level, because there's kind of chords right there when you strum the guitar. There's beautiful stuff, and you can do a lot of stuff just by barring one finger across the fret and get all these different chords. And this technique just opened itself up to me more and more as the more I played. And, you know, my first fledgling rock bands, I was playing mostly standard tuning, but by the time I moved to New York, I was pretty well versed in a lot of different open tunings. Like I said, a lot of old blues players. Reverend Gary Davis was a touchstone, but there were definitely others in there that were playing either fretted guitar or slide guitar with open tunings, and it just opened up this whole world to me. And when I moved to New York and started playing with some of these downtown composers, in particular Glenn Branca and another guy named Reese Chatham, who were both working with open tunings, the enormity of what you could do with them really just cemented for me. And when Thurston and I met to start Sonic Youth, we really had between us just a couple of electric guitars, and most of them were pretty cheap electric guitars at that point. We didn't have a lot of money to buy expensive guitars, and most of them didn't really sound that great in standard tuning, because they either wouldn't stay in standard tuning, you know, they'd go out of tune, or they were not intonated well. And we just started making up tunings for some of these guitars, and they sounded better to us, either in some cases detuned, or in many cases just in tunings of our own devising. And it really just led us down this path of working with non-standard tuning. And as we started to collect more and more guitars and get better and better guitars, we just found we were gravitating towards more of these open tunings. And it really led to what became our sound as a band. We didn't, you know, one of the cool things about Sonic Youth is we really didn't sound like any other band, because we weren't playing in standard tuning. So we became liberated from, you know, G chord and C chord and D chord, all those standard things that every guitar player plays and that you hear whenever you hear a record where someone's playing guitar. And our music sounded different just because we weren't playing those chords. And in fact, you know, we had many tunings where we had no idea what chords we were playing. You know, we were going by ear listening and putting our fingers down until stuff sounded good. And then sometimes Thurston and I would be in sort of correlated tunings, but not the same tuning. And we were, you know, we would experiment until we found sort of sympathetic things that we were doing that worked well together. And, you know, I mean, I guess we knew the roots of the chords, but we couldn't have told you in many cases what the chords even were that we were playing, because we were just in this sound world that was kind of liberated from all those normalized strictures. And it became a touchstone for us. And that was really a breakthrough that opened up so many different worlds of, you know, discoveries of, like I said, people like the Velvet Underground were doing stuff like that, and getting deeper and deeper into some of the music that I already loved, like Joni Mitchell in particular, and Keith Richards and David Crosby as another one. And just finding out about, you know, classical musicians or contemporary musicians that were playing guitars in other tunings, in just intonation, or you know, microtonal guitar fretboards and things like that. And it really just opened up this whole world of liberating me and liberating my group from kind of the standard way of operating.
Wow, that's so cool. Thank you for explaining that.
Yeah.
In another interview saying that it kind of all started from the Beatles, and I was wondering,
yeah,
I was like, wow, what was what happened? So now you explained it. That's really exciting.
Yeah. You know, I love pop music, and I was raised with the AM radio on in the kitchen before going to elementary school and stuff. And the Beatles are huge in my life. So, but as I grew older, I also found I was really interested in a lot of forms of experimental music. And by the time I hit, whether it was um, progressive rock or a lot of the things that were happening out in California, like for instance, the Grateful Dead were a big touchstone for me. And later a band like Television in New York in the new wave days, where they were playing songs, but they were also playing extended instrumental pieces where they were improvising, and Sonic Youth really took both of those means to heart. We loved a good, concise song, but we also liked a 20-minute improv where we were stretching out in different ways. And we never really wanted to leave one or the other behind. So we kind of always incorporated both into the music that we made.
Was there a moment when you showed family or your parents like, hey, this is Sonic Youth, and they said, oh, okay? Or how'd that go?
It was interesting. Let's put it that way at first. Another thing that set Sonic Youth apart is we weren't like high school kids that came out of a garage playing rock and roll. We'd all gone to college, we'd all gotten degrees in different things. My degree was in visual arts, and so was Kim's, and Thurston, before he dropped out of school, was studying literature. And so we were kind of versed in a lot of kind of contemporary culture practice. And when we started playing music, it didn't sound like what you would hear on the radio. And I think that was the first thing that my parents and friends thought when they really started to hear this stuff, is like, well, it sounds pretty weird, And I think in our earliest period, it did sound weird to, outside ears. And the thing I always say back then, like pre-internet, even pre-music magazines in the States that were covering experimental music, Rolling Stone was the only one, and they weren't really covering it. If you lived in Manhattan, everybody was doing experimental music of one sort or another. It was just kind of imprinted in the culture. And yet as soon as you left Manhattan, like when Sonic Youth was doing our first tours, we happened to be able to go to Europe very, very early in our career, like 2 years after we started. And it was the first time we'd really been out of New York. We hadn't toured much in America yet. But the few gigs we did here outside of New York and the gigs in Europe, we really realized, like, people were like, wow, you guys are really weird. This sounds really weird. And in New York, it was just everybody sounded weird. So it was normal in a way, and we didn't realize how strange it sounded until we left New York and got reactions from people elsewhere. And as time went on, like as the 80s became the 90s and indie became alternative or whatever, people got more used to the sound. More bands were playing with open tunings. Pavement, later compadres of ours, were playing in a lot of open tunings for one band. But the sound that we made in the earliest period became a little bit, not more normalized, but more something that people's ears were used to hearing. But the first shows that my parents came to, they were their mind was boggled. Like, I had a college degree, and they were like, what's this going to amount to? And it was only after we had sort of like early success that they came around to understanding what we were doing,
Yeah, that's funny. Pretty much every artist I work with has some story about how they exposed their parents to their music and their art. And it's it threads artists together. How you displayed your talent to your parents.
Yeah. I think the first thing my parents saw was actually a Glenn Branca performance, one of his early symphonies. I think it was called Symphony No. 2. There were 13 of us on stage. There were a bunch of electric guitars, and there were a bunch of these instruments he was starting to build for himself at that point. And it was one of the loudest things you've ever heard in your life. And my parents were just flabbergasted. After, it was in 3 or 4 movements. It was like an hour and a half long evening. And after the first 20 minutes, they were outside the church where it was happening, like listening from outside, because it was too loud for them. But, so they were pretty flabbergasted at first.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Something that I love about your art and your music is that you are always collaborating with so many, such a wide, range of artists. I had a friend, another artist I work with, who said, ask Lee about working with Cypress Hill. And I was like, wow. I was like, he really works with everyone. And then let's loop it into your current collaboration project, which is the Wild Classical Music Ensemble with Lee Ranaldo. And I listened to that. It's amazing.
It's pretty interesting.
How, you know, when I was listening to it, I was even thinking like, wow, this is like Sonic Youth almost seems like not hard compared to this stuff. You know what I mean? I don't know if you think that, but it's
Mhm. Mhm.
how
You
do you
know, I just did it. That album just came out recently, and I just did 7 or 8 dates with them in Europe. And the first thing to say about the Wild Classical Music Ensemble is that um, they're all challenged players in one form or another, either Down syndrome or other kind of handicaps. One of the guys is blind. One of them has no real speech to speak of, you know. And their playing music started as a therapeutic practice and then blossomed into this thing that started taking to the stage. And through a friend of mine who's a Belgian sculptor, we made recordings together, and we filmed a piece for a museum show a couple of years ago in Belgium. And this record just came out, and I just did some shows with them. And I have to say, they were the most punk ensemble that I have played with in probably 25 years or something like that. They were ferocious, and the one guy sings in French, and the other guy sings in a combination of English and Flemish. So I didn't always understand what they were talking about, but they were talking about their afflictions and living in the world, and in a greater sense, like what it means to be normal to a degree. And the
wow.
people that were there that understood what they were singing about just said like, oh my God, you wouldn't believe how moving the lyrics are that these guys are singing, you know? And so it's been a really interesting experience for me on a number of different levels. Musically, it brought me back to my earliest days living in New York, where music was really a free for all, and you were playing, you know, in a very kind of untutored way. That was punk, and especially the New York variant of no wave, you know. But it was a blast playing with them on this tour, and to see the love that came back from the audience was really cool.
That's great. That's great to hear. I
Yeah.
really was moved by the piece, so that's awesome.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that.
Yeah. When these collaborations come up, is there any that you think like, oh, this won't be too hard, or I think I can do this pretty easily, and then it's the other way, or vice versa?
You know, you always have to take your collaborator, no matter who they are or how large they loom in your legend, uh, as a musical peer, you know. So you always have to meet on that ground of like, we're making music together, you know. That's the bottom line. You have a certain respect for each other. So whether it was things that you know, Sonic Youth did with Iggy Pop, or you know, when we toured with Neil Young, we didn't really collaborate with him except in the fact that we toured together for a few months in the early 90s. Or like Cypress Hill, you know, at the time we did that collaboration, it was for a movie soundtrack where they were putting a rock band and a rap band together. And, you know, living in New York, we got to see a lot of the genesis of rap music right alongside our own strains of, you know, downtown noise rock or whatever you want to call it. And we loved that music with a great passion. And you know, we considered it the other New York folk music at the time. I mean, this is what was happening in New York. Downtown weirdos like us tuning our guitars all strange. And then these guys up in the Bronx that were playing with nothing more than a turntable or something. And Cypress Hill were one of the ones that we really liked. We toured with them on Lollapalooza in '95. And we didn't have any idea what to expect going into a studio to try and make a song with them. And you know, we just met as musical peers with mutual respect, and it was a total blast. And pretty much every collaboration we've done and that I've done since Sonic Youth stopped playing have been on that level. You know, just like you start from, we're both musicians, we have some common ground. Maybe you're going to show me some things that I don't know, and vice versa. And just see what happens, and it usually works out pretty well.
Do you think that type of collaboration, that spirit is going away, or it just looks different now with technology? Or I'm not sure how that goes.
Well, you know, I don't think it's going away. I think, you know, especially in the rap and R&B world, there's always featured vocalists on so many people's records, you know, and musical collaborations, you know, sometimes even songwriting, you get like 30 or 40 songwriters on a song. So there's lots of different, it's mutated a little bit. as the music business has gotten so big on those levels. But even, you know, in terms of small scale musicians, friends of mine that I know that play in small clubs, there's always a lot of collaboration going on. And I think it's one way, you know, music is often something that's made for a community. You know, you're a part of a community when you're playing music, and that's one of the great things about it. So I don't think it's going away.
That's awesome. I'm glad you said that.
Yeah.
You, just to talk real quick about Sonic Youth, I wanted to mention the last release was the In Out In, which
Yeah.
is awesome. I listened to
Thanks.
that. And, so I guess I wanted to ask you what it's like to be part of something so big that you are, you know, you're a caretaker, the curator, and almost a historian for your band. And I just I don't know, it's a pretty rare thing. So what's that like, having such a catalog to draw on and just such a legacy?
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting. We stopped about 10 or 12 years ago, but we were together for 30 years. And we saw the face of the music business change, you know, radically during that period. And, you know, luckily for us, I mean, we managed to straddle this world where we were making records for 20 years on a major label, on Geffen Universal, and we were also making records on a small label we established ourselves. So we kind of had a foot in each camp. You know, we were making sort of big time records that had big budgets and putting them out on a major label, and we were also slipping a lot of like marginal stuff into the slipstream as well. And we were lucky enough to just bring fans with us along the way, you know, from the earliest period. And so 30 years in, we've got a massive archive of stuff that we've tried to grow and cultivate. We've got 30 years worth of tapes and videos and interviews and photos, and people are still sending us, you know, like, I took pictures of you guys in 2004 or in 1988, and here's a roll of film, and, you know, just collecting all that stuff. And at some point we're hoping to make our archive more available. But one of the things we've been doing is drawing on it for some of these releases we've put out since we stopped playing together. And In Out In is just the latest one, and it's mostly instrumental compositions from I think, I don't know, across an 8 or 10 year span. And it came out, I don't know, 6 or 8 months ago, and we were kind of amazed at the outpouring of love that record got, because, you know, it never hurts to be reassured that people are still into what you're doing. But like, people just seem to really love that record when it came out, and appreciate the fact that, you know, in a way, okay, we've got some new Sonic Youth to listen to, you know, and it wasn't just a live record of a concert or something, which we have released a bunch of. But we've been trying to release a bunch of studio rarities like that over the last few years. A lot of them go on Bandcamp or here or there, but this one was the first one that actually came out on vinyl, and it was really gratifying to us to hear how much people dug it.
Yeah, it's awesome. I dug it, so thank you so much. Do you have anything else on the horizon with those projects that you can talk about or want to talk about, or with
Sonic Youth wise? We are, I mean, I think I'm allowed to talk about it now. We're about to release another sort of co-release with an outside label from our own, that is what we call the last show that we did, which was 2011. It was here in New York, on the Brooklyn waterfront, and it was technically, I mean, in our minds, it was the last show we did. We did 5 more shows in South America about 5 months later that we were contractually obligated to do, and we didn't want to break those contracts. But they were, you know, at that point we were just doing them to fulfill our obligations and not let people down. But the one here in Brooklyn was, I consider that our last show, where we really were still a band and not yet cognizant of the fact that we weren't going to continue. So we're about to put that out as a double LP, and it's really a beautiful concert. And we were playing, for some reason at that moment, we were playing songs from all across our history. So it's got songs from our very first record from 1981 and songs from our most recent stuff from 2010, 2011, and like everything in between. So it's a pretty cool concert to release.
Wow. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Wow. How do you, maybe last question. I thank you for all your time with us.
Oh, my pleasure.
How do you balance, I know you're a writer and you do the visual art and you do the music and you do all types of musical projects. What's the schedule for Lee Ranaldo? How do you figure out what you're going to be looking at when?
I mean, it's usually the schedule is centered around either tours, music tours, or, writing periods. Like right now, I just came off a month in Europe. And actually during that period, I had an art show in Europe and I had another one here in New York of some of my drawings. And, sometimes it's a little complicated, but right now I'm in a period where I'm trying to spend as much time here in the studio as possible. I've got a couple sort of long form things I'm working on mixing and finalizing, and I'm writing music for my next song record. And sometimes it's a little chaotic, but mostly it starts from a music schedule and then however much time I can steal to sort of go to my painting studio. Writing kind of happens all the time. I'm writing in my downtime or whatever, but sometimes if I'm stuck on something or if I've just done a big music project, I'll sort of refresh myself by doing visual art, by making paintings or drawings, and just kind of bouncing between the three. Sometimes things I'm writing will turn into song lyrics for songs, or sometimes words will get put on the canvas or, whatever. So they kind of mutually feed each other in a way. And that's pretty much the way I've worked with those three streams between writing and visual art and music since I was in high school. Basically, I've always done all three of those things. And so they seem to complement each other really well.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I don't know if I keep saying that. It's just so cool to talk to you. And, there's just something about, I can't explain it. There's just lifers. There's just artists that they don't stop. They never stop.
Yeah.
The best.
Yeah. Well, we had a song on one of our last records called Radical Adults Lick Godhead Style. And in that song, we were kind of imagining, the peers of ours that were not, for instance, one-hit wonders or that flamed out by the time they were 35, but like, people like Neil and Dylan or Yoko or, people in all disciplines that have, that we love, that have had lifelong careers where there's no thought of stopping and there's also no sense that their best years were behind them. You know what I mean? Like they're still doing vital work in their 60s and 70s and 80s. And that was always kind of a model for the way we wanted to be. I mean, if you're an artist, you don't really have a retirement date as long as you remain connected and inspired. You keep going, and you hope that you're going to just continue to do work that's valid and that people are moved by.
Awesome. I don't know if let's just stop. That was awesome. My guitar breakthrough. I'm Scott Marceau with Yamaha. Thanks so much, Lee Ranaldo, for joining us, and we'll see you soon.